Welcome. We're going to give everybody a few more minutes to join as folks are still entering into the webinar. So be back in 1 minute. As folks are joining, want to let you all know that if anyone has any questions that they'd like any of us to cover over the course of this hour, please put them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, either now or throughout the discussion. We will have some time at the end to cover questions from the audience as well as any other comments anyone might have. All right. So good afternoon and welcome everyone to this latest webinar in Boundary Stone's Election Impact Series. My name is Mike Obeater, and I'm a Senior Vice President here at Boundary Stone Partners. We are the leading climate change advisory and government affairs firm working at the intersection of technology, policy, and finance. Here at BSP, I co-lead our federal finance practice group, where we help companies navigate federal funding and financing programs in the form of loans, grants, and tax credits. As part of this work, Boundary Stone assists companies, both large and small, with their project development and project finance decision-making. Myself, before joining the Boundary Stone team about 2.5 years ago, I spent around 15 years working on energy and climate policy in DC in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. Here at BSP, I'm lucky to work with experts both within our team and out in the field to support the priorities of advanced manufacturers in the US. And we have two of those experts here with us today, and I'm grateful that they are able to join us. We have from Savills, Ken Biberai and Mark Cody. Ken is the Executive Managing Director in Savills DC office. He specializes in site selection for advanced manufacturing companies, given his public policy expertise. He is notably the host of a podcast called Coffee with Ken, where he interviews business, governmental, and nonprofit leaders. Prior to Savills, he was the chairman of the board of directors in the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce in New York City and vice president of Morgan Barrington Associates. Mark Cody is Savills vice chairman located in their Boston office. At Savills, he leads the corporate account development and global management for public technology and life sciences companies, and he specializes in strategy and site selection for advanced manufacturing companies. Prior to joining Savills, he was the co-founder and managing partner of T3 Advisors, which was later acquired by Savills. So with that, I want to say thanks to you both for taking the time to discuss the site selection process with us today, or as we have cleverly, I think, and alliteratively titled this webinar, People, Power, and Place. How should the companies at the heart of the energy transition choose their facility locations? So we're going to kick off the discussion with a brief overview of how landmark climate policies have transformed domestic manufacturing. Then I plan to ask Ken and Mark a number of questions to get your insights on the site selection process. And finally, we'll close with some questions from the audience. And again, if anyone in the audience has a question that you'd like us to cover, please submit it via Zoom's Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those questions at the end. So with that, Ken, I'm going to pass it over to you to walk us through a brief state of play in the site selection arena before we jump into our panel discussion.
Well, excellent. Well, Michael, thanks for having us. Awesome to spend some time with you and my colleague Mark and your entire Boundary Stone team and all your friends and colleagues listening in. So, at a high level, American manufacturing is back. And that's an easy statement to say, but when you kind of unpack it, you really have to appreciate and realize that manufacturing had really disappeared in this country for decades. So, what we're trying to do is systematically rebuild a manufacturing base and ecosystem across the country. And it's as a result of these landmark pieces of legislation from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, Inflation Reduction Act, and CHIPS Act, coupled by investments from Department of Energy, Commerce, DoD, NASA, and even the Export-Import Bank, that the federal dollars and support coming out to companies to manufacture again in America is really an unprecedented moment. But what Mark and I spend time on for clients is realizing the kind of rubber hitting the road and the challenges associated with actually finding the right sites that are kind of, to your point, Michael, we're talking about people, power, and place. Are these locations near the talent you need for the factories and the products you're looking to build? Is the power readily available for these sites and these opportunities? The competition with new data centers and AI is exacerbating that challenge. A lot of shovel-ready, power-ready sites have already kind of been taken. So how are states and localities planning for that? And place, what is the impact of supply chain and where you are? So at a high level, we've been pretty surprised over the last, 12 to 18 months on our travels around the country at how enthusiastic states and localities are and what an opportunity it is for them. So while site selection is a challenge because of supply constraints and power in place, it's also a massive opportunity. Unlike any other time, the geographic map in the United States is wide open for manufacturing. And you're starting to see the impact hitting the ground. And this graph just shows nearly $1 trillion of public and private capital already being deployed for projects all around the United States. So we're going to be able to kind of spend some time today talking about what localities are doing to be competitive. And I think what's been exciting about our friendship and partnership with Boundary Stone is this ability to understand and navigate clients through the federal landscape while also paying attention to what's needed on the ground with states and localities. So excited for the conversation today.
Great. Thanks very much, Ken. Appreciate you setting the scene like that. But now want to dive a little bit deeper into this topic. So for this part of the discussion, I'm going to throw individual questions at both of you guys. Feel free to keep the conversation going. Even if I don't ask you a question individually, please feel free to add on as you see fit. So Ken, I will start with you. In your experience, can you speak to how you've seen the site selection process impacted by federal, state, local, and private sector requirements and incentives? So above and beyond those laws that you mentioned, what are you seeing on the ground?
I think it's a little bit of a different moment where the federal incentives have really captured the attention of an incredible cohort of new companies that are looking to make an impact on climate change. So these companies are really early stage startups. Some have gotten investment from ARPA-E or federal agencies in the past. So they tend to be a little bit more focused on these federal incentives. So what we've tried to do is kind of help take down the barriers and the silos between the overall site selection process. So no longer can you just be focused on the federal stuff or just focused on state stuff or just focused on localities. We try to bring a holistic approach to site selection that keeps in mind what's happening at the federal level so that when you're searching for sites, it's impactful and accretive to whatever application you're submitting. Because as you know, Michael, when you submit a federal application for a loan or a grant, the federal government will want to know where you're putting it. What are the community benefits in that area? Is it in a disadvantaged community? Is it in an energy community? So we want to help the client really capture that information so that we can accomplish their goals at the federal level, but also ensure we're building a competitive process amongst the states so we can get them the best deal for the most shovel-ready project. So it's kind of taking down the silos and running a kind of comprehensive process, keeping all of these levers of government from local, state to federal in mind.
Thank you, Ken. Mark, turning to you. Can you talk about the role that talent plays in the site selection process? So getting back to the theme of people, are we finding the right people in the right places to support new advanced manufacturing facilities? What's been your experience lately, and how do we continue to improve the ability of advanced manufacturers to find the folks that they need?
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. My main message, so when we do site selection, okay, we always come in and everyone wants to focus on incentives. Um, Incentives are important, but if you can't hire the people and you can't meet your job projections, it's all moot. So we spend an inordinate amount of time on understanding labor, and I'll get into that about how to do that because I think you need to do it a little bit differently in some of these locations that may not have as much data as others. So how do you assess whether I can hire 1,000 jobs in a certain state or locality? Um, the way I think about it is there's past labor data. Okay, you got to be really careful not just to rely on past data, but in some of these locations, there's so many projects coming in. You also have to project out the number of jobs versus the labor supply. So we do a lot of projections around future projects coming in. And then what we'll do is we will actually we'll do 5-year future forward labor projections based on job pledges, um, based on volumes coming in. And then what you have to identify is your gaps. No location is going to have all the technical and non-technical talent you need. So what you do then is you identifying gaps, and then in your site selection, you've got to work on customized training programs so that there's going to be a certain type of job where it's not existing right now in the labor force. So my message to clients is there's not going to be a perfect solution out there, but you've got to understand what location, what MSA will allow you the most customized training to fill those gaps, and then future predict your labor statistics to make an informed opinion on your ultimate decision.
And just one thing to piggyback on what Mark's saying, what we're trying to help solve for isn't just the employees you'll need when you're operational, it's even to build your factory. So if you're going to go to like Ohio and Intel has hired every plumber and electrician in the area, right? Like that's important information to know because speed to market is all part of this calculus. So I think what we're trying to offer is a very holistic kind of approach of like all these challenges that may emerge because they're very real, just finding even construction help around the country.
Yeah, and one other thing, Ken and Michael, we've worked with a lot of companies coming out of Silicon Valley, Boston area, Research Triangle, where they have R&D. So the other thing we want to look at is what locations a migration of functions in. So even if it's a manufacturing facility, we want to separate out technical, non-technical, and then do feasibility of future functions coming in from other locations. And I think that's an important thing is like realize the ceiling of what can be achieved at those locations, but also what's the potential if you're going to make $1 billion investment in an area, what other functions can we get in and just prove that through data, which is what we spend time on.
Great. Thank you. Ken, we had a map up on the screen. We don't have to go back to it, but during your presentation that showed sort of the scale and scope of all of the investments in recent years in advanced manufacturing. What we couldn't see from that because it was too small is the colors of those dots and the clustering of those dots. Because we have seen industry sectors cluster in similar regions of the map. And we've seen new technology hubs emerge in recent years. Just off the top of my head, EVs in Georgia, hydrogen hubs around the country, the so-called battery belt in the Southeast, just to name a few, that have sprung up as a result of the landmark climate policies that you talked about. So in addition to state level incentives, can you talk through why sector-specific technology hubs have sprung up where they do?
Sure. As you mentioned, this is a wide open map. And while these companies can't go anywhere, the competition is so real amongst the states to attract these projects because of the talent and the capital they're going to invest in those communities. So, as a result, some communities and states and jurisdictions are trying to create their own identity that they want to then take to the market to capture more market share. So, whether it's kind of semiconductor chips in Arizona with TSMC and building out that ecosystem, or Tulsa wants to be known for drones, or the IFAB partnership in Illinois, or the battery belt. Some locations have really leaned into what is our talent that exists today? What are the educational opportunities and buckets that we're already focused on that we could double down on to attract these businesses. So you're starting to see kind of collaboration among state universities, technical colleges that are kind of looking to shape the same narrative. So because of this competition, you don't have to start from scratch. If you're a particular type of company, we focus on, okay, well, where are your peers located? And, or is there a benefit to clustering, or is there a geography in the country that has not received a lot of these projects that is now looking to capture it, that you might be a first mover or have the opportunity to go to? But we have to take into account everything Mark talked about. At the end of the day, is the talent there and so on. So that's really that third bucket of like place, the kind of intangibles around like the identity of your company and does it fit the community you're targeting. So all of these factors need to be weighed, and you got to kind of look at it with what's going to help you with the federal government applications. Is it a solid state and local incentive package? And to Mark's point, very rarely are we ever, advising or guiding a client to go to the state that has the highest incentive package. That's just not how this is done, right? Like it's not about just like someone throwing all the money at you. It's got to really be your identity in a place that makes sense for your company to grow and flourish. So the competition's real. Folks are trying to figure out how to position themselves, and we now are spending a lot of time talking directly to landowners and economic development authorities who are trying to figure out how do they fit into this puzzle and how do they capture more opportunity. And should they make a bet saying we want quantum or we want AI or we want data, right? So everyone's trying to figure out, do they do that or do they wait? So, but the activity is real, and it's an exciting moment.
Thanks. And if I could add on, something I've seen in my experience, there's often this virtuous cycle that takes place where you get one or maybe two companies in a particular industry that build in a state. For example, EVs in Georgia. Because of that, the federal representatives in Congress become champions for those industries. They see the impact that they're having on their constituents, that they're creating good paying jobs, and they want to attract even more investment along those lines. And so what they do is they become champions for the types of policies, be they tax credits or otherwise, that could help attract even more industries like that to their states. And so then again, this just again becomes more of a virtuous feedback loop where the more companies that settle in a particular place, the more that labor pool moves there, the more the incentives are aligned to attract even more of those companies, and more companies move in.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, I think that's what's kind of differentiated our approach to this. Like I sit in DC, Mark sits in Boston, as you noted. We're paying attention to where the tech hubs are being located. We want our clients to know that we know where the federal government is kind of making soft commitments, whether it's in South Carolina for a battery tech hub or quantum in Illinois. Like those are important factors to know. We're not doing site selection in a vacuum based on, kind of the static information of the past. As Mark said, we're focused on 5-year projections on labor. We're focused on where federal dollars are going, what communities are doubling on certain sectors. So we're looking at it in a very holistic way.
All right. So we have talked about people and place, at least cover them in some detail a little bit so far. But power, Mark. Access to reliable power, as you know, is a major element of the site selection process and the energy transition more broadly. Can you speak to companies' challenges and opportunities when navigating power infrastructure needs?
Yeah, obviously, I mean, I think everyone's reading the press and articles and focus on federal programs around power lead times and associated with AI data centers, what percentage of power they're going to take. So this is a huge issue. Again, this is another issue like labor where incentives in your best laid plans could be moot if you don't address this early in the process. So how do you go about doing that? You think about it a couple of ways. One, we always, when we're looking, let's say we're in a process and we have 10 states and we want to get to a short list, everything in the RFP, it's important to have your power draw schedule by year up front, which means spending some engineering time on what that draw schedule is going to look like is really important because it's hard to make that up quickly, which means some process layout designs and informed opinion on that. So then what we do in those RFPs, we'll submit them to the state, municipalities, and we also meet with all the local utilities. I think it's really important to profile your utilities. There's some real creative utilities, and then there's some utilities that are the exact opposite. And you really have to know who you're dealing with, and you can't take lead times on face value. I think the average lead times are going to get higher, where what used to be 2 years is headed towards 3 years. So if you think about that, and you think about your power draw schedule, you also need to have a hedge strategy of there's some on-site generation plays that may be able to get you construction power, interim power, and what we would say, Ken and I have met with a lot of those players, is work in that sector to understand and bridge that gap. And that's kind of one of the things that we do is we match up companies with interim power providers, and then we look at the risk and really understand and spend a lot of time meeting with utilities to assess that risk. Because to be honest, some of them don't know what the lead times are. And you'll hear things like, well, if a project's canceled, we'll get you a transformer, but it's hard to rely on that. So Michael, that's a kind of long-winded to say of like the overall picture, and there's a lot more in there, but I was just trying to capture some of the highlights.
I might piggyback just at 2 quick points. I'd say honestly, when we're doing our state and local incentive negotiations with the states, literally, I think Mark, right? Power is practically the most important thing. So if you're doing a big search and like, yes, it matters if you're getting the tax benefits for your employees or the rebates, whether it's machinery investment, but if you can get a substation built on your factor on your land, if you can get rates predetermined in advance, if you have that certainty on the power, it makes all the other incentives kind of pale in comparison. So that's one thing. The second thing, to Mark's point, we are now actually taking direct conversations with the utilities around the country, even without client kind of guidance, to understand what sites are actually available or coming available that aren't even on the market yet. So we're so focused on staying ahead of these trends and ensuring clients that we have will know about the best sites that are ready ahead of time. And the last thing is, people in the past have made these decisions. Michael, I'm sure you've seen it, where they just pick a site, they double down, and they go for an application, and they can't get the power they think they're going to get. Or they've picked it in a location where there's like an elected official who's the utility head, and like the risk associated with that versus a larger utility could be a risk. And our entire strategy through this entire effort of what we do for clients is to de-risk the situation. There's already enough pressure in pursuing federal incentives. You don't want to get tripped up on your path to deliverability by a utility challenge or an issue. So
Yeah. And finally, Ken, I would say you have to get to the right person at the utility and view the utility as a partner, not as a vendor or just a provider of power, because they'll appreciate that. What I mean by that is a lot of our clients, whether it's energy storage, that's what the utilities are going to have to branch into. So view it as a partnership discussion. Part of what we do is we profile who to get to within the utilities, because if you start at the bottom, you're going to have to work your way up, and we try to undercut that and be efficient and get to the right person early.
Thanks, guys. And if I could weigh in with a couple observations at both the micro level, but especially also at the macro level. A fourth P, permitting. When you're building not just the facility, but you're trying to site power or build necessary transmission lines or substations, permitting is often one of the long lead items and often a significant hurdle. And just one of many shameless plugs I'll make today. Boundary Stone is standing up a permitting coalition called America Builds, where it's going to be multi-industry, and we're going to be focusing on areas of agreement across industries where we can reduce barriers to construction of advanced manufacturing and the power that they need. Because as my former boss, Senator Schatz, put it on a podcast I listened to recently, the laws that we have on the books, the environmental bedrock laws, NEPA, the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, excellent at what they do, but they were designed, 50 years ago to prevent bad things from happening. What we need now is sort of a change in mindset where we have statutes and regulations and policies that enable good things to happen. We obviously still want to prevent the bad things from happening, but there's no reason it should take a decade or longer to build a transmission line to connect clean power in one region with clean manufacturing in another region that needs it. So permitting, fourth P, A little bit off topic, but something that is, needs to be part of the conversation.
I think it's directly on topic. And even in our negotiations on the incentives, we want to know what permits are needed, who issues those permits, who at the county and state level will be responsible for those approvals. Does the fire chief report to economic development, right? Like, what is the city manager's opinion? Like, we're actually getting that far in the weeds that sometimes we're trying to either get permit fees waived or at least have line of sight of what permits will be required for clients ahead of time. So it is a very important thing, obviously at the federal level, but also at the state and local level. Like the last thing you want to do is commit to an area and then there's an air quality permit issue where it's going to take 2 years for that to be accomplished. So not only the costs, the bureaucracy, and the timing for permits are all relevant.
Again, I'm going to call another audible, add another P. Politics.
Oh,
I know, sorry.
that's your territory.
Well, I'm going to toss the question to you and see how you handle it. So, Ken, I know this is not your area, so there's an election coming up in November.
Hadn't heard.
How do you see election outcomes impacting the site selection process going forward? Are there partisan divides in this space? And as I mentioned, another shameless plug, how can a parallel government relations strategy help companies navigate the politics, minimizing risks to changes in policy that would negatively affect them while maximizing opportunities to make sure they're able to capitalize whenever opportunities arise at the federal or state level to implement policies that would enable them to grow faster and more profitably?
So I think it is a bifurcated question. A lot of these incentives are federally related. So there's clearly a federal election. And there's a lot of kind of conversation and unknown around that at the moment about whether certain programs like Inflation Reduction Act or Loan Program Office, et cetera, how those will exist if things were to change in this election year. So I'll kind of throw that back to you afterwards. But at the state and local level, one of the things that I've been most pleasantly surprised by is the lack of political discussion on any of these trips. So whether we're in Indiana or Oklahoma or Texas or Georgia or South Carolina, the enthusiasm from the state, the county, and local leaders is very real. They are all committed to winning these projects and creating jobs and having investments in their community. So whether it's, Governor Holcomb in Indiana acknowledging that he's a concierge, he wants to make your visit to his state enjoyable, or whether it's Governor Stitt in Oklahoma publicly saying that if you don't get your permits in a certain amount of days, then they're free, right? Or Governor Abbott traveling across Southeast Asia to go visit factories and meet with companies. Governors are executives, and they care about what's happening in their state and delivering jobs. And despite the noise happening at the federal level, these governors, these state economic development authorities are very focused on helping these companies get their projects off the ground and winning them into their states. So putting politics aside, the enthusiasm has been pretty wild across the country. That map we showed earlier shows the geographic dispersion of these projects. So hopefully Washington can kind of hold the course and keep its act together, because what's happening out across this country is real. And I honestly think we're just in the second inning. These shovels are just going in the ground. Training programs are just beginning. So these projects are very much live time. So hopefully this is something where we can keep this a true nonpartisan issue, and we can all stay focused on investing in advanced manufacturing across this country, because it's going to make us stronger from a national security perspective. It's going to help us economically, and it's going to obviously help us technologically to make sure we're continuing to have the most advanced products in the world coming out of the United States.
Thanks, Ken. That was a pretty political answer yourself. But you said something. You said putting politics aside, which that sounds nice. As you mentioned, that's not really something that we can do here at Boundary Stone, but we work within the politics to try to deliver on results for clients. And so I think what that means in terms of this conversation is, you mentioned there's a number of programs within the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law, that, realistically could be in some jeopardy if there's a change in administration, if Republicans take over the Senate and the White House. But I think what we're seeing at the same time is the impact that a lot of these investments in these local communities are having and how it's bubbling up to the top level. So just as an example, we mentioned the battery belt in the Southeast. We mentioned EVs in Georgia, hydrogen hubs throughout the country. In all of those instances, we have significant investments going in red districts. And along with those investments, there's jobs. And people tend to like their jobs. And that tends to reduce opposition, if not necessarily build support for the types of incentives, the types of policies that enable those investments in the first place. And so we've seen news coverage, especially in recent days, that shows that there's a softening of opposition amongst a good number of the Republican caucus in the House to the tax credits in the Inflation Reduction Act that have made a lot of these advanced manufacturing projects possible in the first place. And even Speaker Johnson himself, for the past couple of days, said something along the lines of, we're not going to repeal the IRA whole cloth. We're going to take a scalpel, not a sledgehammer, and we're going to be, studious about which tax credits we try to repeal and which ones would stay. And, this is weird for me to say, but I'm cautiously optimistic that the clean energy tax credits, the 45Xs, for example, 45Vs, are going to withstand any change in politics if there is one, because what matters to folks in the House is their constituents having jobs, and that's what these bills are doing.
Yeah, I share that optimism. I think I'd be very hard pressed to see projects that are on the cusp of federal support and being shovel ready kind of get pulled in communities that need them. So whether you're Republican or Democrat, I think when we step back and look at, is this good for America? Does this help, secure our supply chain? Is this good for our national security? A lot of these projects are directly in those veins. So it'd be a little hard to cut them open.
Hey, Michael, one other thing, it's not as much like the politics side of it, but it's important in these locations, whatever state, you clients, that we map out who is making the decisions.
Mhm.
So each program, there may be a committee, there may be Speaker of the House approval, legislative approval. And what you want to make sure is how that's going to work. If you have a short list, you got to map that out and know someone's got to approve the money. And in some states, it's not as transparent as you would think. So map that out up front, and then also hit both sides of the fence, whatever party, and just make sure you're building support on both sides of it. And that just helps at a local level. That's not at a federal level. But we'll actually just do for each program you're going for, who are the players involved, and just work with the clients, and as well work with Boundary Stone on this for your short list. I think that's a really important part of the process.
But and that's why folks like you, Michael, are so important, right? Like I think sometimes some of these companies, they may come out of the Bay Area or Boston, Research Triangle, they may not be used to politics. They may just kind of not want to have to deal with it. And unfortunately, if these programs are tied to federal incentives, you're going to have to roll up your sleeves and kind of make your case to your member of Congress. Like you're going to have to do some work here. So you can't take it for granted. You can't take these programs for granted. So I think companies come into that realization. I think sometimes they're a little surprised that they're going to have to actually do some of the selling in Washington as well. So that's just an important part of it.
Yeah, and thanks. And just to sort of build on that goes for both defense and offense.
Yeah.
Obviously, if there is a change in policy that a company needs in order for it to be competitive with foreign companies making the same product, in order to be able to pay their workers what they deserve to be paid, we can work with them obviously to find champions in Congress and try to get those changes enacted. But there are a lot of really popular and powerful tools on the books already that need to be defended, because if companies that rely on those incentives don't make their voices heard, don't let their representatives know how important those incentives are, then elected officials may not be aware and may put them on the chopping block. So, regardless of the election outcomes, we've got a significant amount of defense to play going forward, but there's going to be opportunities to play offense as well. And good government relations strategy can identify the opportunities for both and help ensure commercial success.
Can I ask you a question now?
Oh no. I mean, yeah, please.
So I've noticed in our past conversations, I mean, it's not just the Department of Energy, right? Like I think companies even understanding there's different incentives and buckets of dollars from different offices around the government, right? Whether it's DoD, et cetera, right? Like you're helping with folks across all those buckets, right? Like,
Yeah. And I promise our attendees I didn't tell Ken to ask me this question, but I'm glad you did. So
no, I think it's important because like we at the state and local level focus on kind of the stacking of incentives, right? Like, okay, can we get a county land grant? Can we get a power thing, right? Like, but you're also thinking about this as like, can the Export Import Bank do stuff? Can Commerce do, right? Like, there's also kind of at the federal level, it's not just. It seems like they're not competing with each other, but like everyone's trying to get into this game a little bit. It feels like.
exactly. And in some cases, they actually are competing with each other,
Mm.
but that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
If multiple federal agencies want to give you money and you have to choose which one has better terms, that's a good position to be in.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right, Ken. I mean, DOE has made headlines over the past few years because they got an enormous amount of money in the Inflation Reduction Act for grants. They had significant increase in their loan authority for the Loan Programs Office, and we're working with a lot of companies to apply to both of those grants and loans. There's the 48C Advanced Manufacturing Tax Credit. We're helping companies apply for that because it's a tax credit, but it functions more like a grant. You have to apply, kind of a pain, and there's actually a fairly short time frame to do it. So we're working with companies there. Uh, but DoD, DoD has always been obviously a big player. They have considerable procurement authority, but they're also standing up a new program called the Office of Strategic Capital, which is trying to take sort of the lessons learned from the DOE loan program and from other similar loan guarantee programs across the government for industries that have a defense nexus but aren't just for defense. So there's a list of, I think, 15 or so categories of technologies that they're interested in, and that includes energy storage, clean energy generation, uh, things that can be used in the defense sector,
Sure.
but also have a wide array of commercial uses. And they have $900 million in authority right now. There's an RFI out where they're soliciting input from companies and investors for how that program could better suit their needs. And we're anticipating that they'll have somewhere in the neighborhood of $8 billion in loan authority going forward. The Export-Import Bank has historically been an agency that supports American companies investing in projects overseas. They sort of flipped that on its head. They have a new program called Make More in America, where they are trying to get companies to make more in America, foreign companies or domestic companies, as long as there's an quote export nexus. So as long as some of those products, finished products or intermediate products, are exported. And for clean energy and climate technologies, that export nexus is only 15%, which for many companies, it's not that hard to meet that. 85% of your customers are domestic, 15% are international. All of a sudden, you are eligible for some very low cost financing in the form of loans or loan guarantees, not just for construction, which is what LPO and other programs are used for, but even for working capital and operating expenses. And so there are programs throughout the federal government that are designed to support everything from early stage R&D to pilot scale manufacturing to demonstration, first commercial, nth of a kind commercial manufacturing, uh, CapEx, and there are programs to support ongoing operational expenses, helping companies that are decided to manufacture in the US remain competitive with other companies in other countries that may be getting state support. So appreciate the opportunity, Ken, to talk about that. Shifting gears a little bit, Mark, you mentioned the importance of mapping out uh, the politics at both the state and federal, local level. You meant that more in a power mapping sort of context, but I want to bring it back to the more literal sense of the words and address a question we got from an audience member, which is what types of tech tools are you using in the site selection process? So I know we have a slide queued up to talk about Savil's mapping tools, but turn it over to you guys to talk about that.
Yeah, no, thanks. So one of the things, so by the way, the tech tools, it's just an enablement tool to help simplify figuring out, so you don't start at 50 states if there's 25 of them that don't meet your criteria, and we just try to visualize that. So each client has different criteria. Some may be, access to crops, rail, deep harbor ports. So what we do, we have a tool that, well, first of all, it maps out all the federal program requirements, like if it's LPO and it's, tribal lands, Justice 40, we map that out, we visualize that, then we overlay specific criteria. Really, it can be anything. Any data can be visualized. And then for each client, what we then do is we kind of show them the universe so they're not wasting time in other locations. And we can basically toggle on all the criteria. So this just helps visualize, and then we can overlay sites when we get to shortlist or finalists. And it's just a really effective tool of bringing technology in. Um, some point in time, there'll be intelligent AI overlays into this. Now, all this is science. It doesn't take away from the art of site selection. And what I mean by that is I think the tech that we'll build, the tech stack, will get automated. It can point you in a direction, but then it's still the art of knowing the pitfalls, knowing the risks to really take it from a short list to finalist locations.
Great. Thanks very much.
Yep.
Sort of in a related vein, uh, topic I know that is near and dear to both of our hearts, community benefits plans and ensuring that manufacturing projects and other significant economic investments have benefits that go far and wide throughout the community. Um, so I'm often asked, are community benefits plans, are they a real criterion that the government is using? Is this a check the box exercise? Do we really need to be specific? Do we need to be on the ground in those communities to demonstrate the benefits that we're going to bring to them? And the short answer is yes. These are increasingly important as evaluation criteria for applications in the loan grant tax credit space and throughout the federal government. And so, Ken, Mark, I was hoping you guys could speak to how Savills as a company, but also how this mapping tool can help companies think through not just whether a particular census tract qualifies as a disadvantaged community, which is obviously important for a number of tax credit adders and bonuses, but how you're bringing that mindset into the site selection process.
May give a quick one and then I'll let Mark dive in. We think it's incumbent on us because we're also mission oriented, right? Like we enjoy this work because the companies are incredibly innovative. They're very challenging. We can be a resource to them, but they're also changing the world, right? Like whether it's a climate issue or national security issue, right? So we're kind of aligned with what they're trying to do. As it relates to site selection, we think it's so important to kind of push deeper in the data. So the way we educate in this country, right? Like not everyone is going to benefit or have the opportunity for a four-year college degree, but they're going to be incredibly talented people who are tapping community college, vocational college, technical colleges, certificates. The talent base may be there, but you might have to kind of get a couple of layers below the kind of surface data around degrees, right? So we think it's important that we kind of don't dismiss or kind of cross out communities without doing a real dive into what is the talent base there and really kind of making sure we're doing our due diligence for clients to like push them out of their comfort zone, ask the communities to kind of help validate and make the case and give them the opportunity to tell us why we should be giving a better weighted score around the talent potential there than we might have on paper, right? And I think that's just a kind of testament to how Mark and I and our team kind of approach this. We're not looking to just read data off a spreadsheet and say it's gospel, right? We want to understand what's happening on the ground in these communities because things are moving so quick that the data hasn't kept up, right? Like we're trying to do forecasting of jobs. Like if you look at the jobs today, it's not the same as 5 years from now. If we're looking at like a tech hub has been placed in the community and a technical college has had an investment, maybe there's a different talent story on the ground than exists today in the data. And we think it's so important to kind of get beyond that a little bit. And the more you are willing to do that and spend a little bit of time kind of giving communities a chance to make their case, which is our job, is to make this a hard decision for the companies. We want these communities to put their best foot forward. So we're kind of, pushing them and guiding them so that the company has to like really pause and be like, we'll be successful wherever we land, but it should be a hard decision. So we want to make sure we're kind of, pushing them a little bit out of their comfort zone. So, yeah. And then all that information and data, we use it with people like you, Michael. So when you put in the applications for these companies, you're making a stronger case about why and how important that project is to that community, and how others may have just overlooked the kind of data as it exists today versus the true story on the ground. So,
Yeah, Ken, I'll just piggyback the on-ground experience of understanding who the community is, the way it feels like, the opportunity for companies to be a catalyst in these communities. It's really important because we can talk about data to prove to get to a short list, but then in the end, it's your next home, and it has to feel like home, and there's intangibles to that. Um, and by going through this process, it's just interesting, kind of executive reaction on different locations. Also, keep an open mind. The I recommend that companies, sometimes they just want to go to like selection one or two. Sometimes you'll be surprised it's the third or fourth choice based on intangibles like how the community feels, how the community is embracing the company. That's not related to the data gathering side of the community, but I think it's an important lesson learned from being out on the road.
Thank you both. Um, we've talked a lot about sort of the overlay and the intersection between site selection process and federal and state incentives. We did not address a catch-22 that often arises, which is in many cases, having a site selected is a prerequisite or is strongly encouraged, at least, for an application for federal support. It's more important in some places, like the 48C tax credit, than others, like a Part 1 LPO application. But in all cases, having a site selected is, is going to be a condition precedent of money flowing out the door.
Mhm.
However, a lot of companies don't necessarily have the balance sheet, have the resources to purchase attractive land or to lease a site years in advance of when they're going to need it. So how do you work with companies to navigate that catch-22, minimize risk, and turn that into an opportunity?
Yeah, I think part of this is having honest, transparent conversations with clients in advance, understanding their levers, their needs, opportunities, pressures. And oftentimes, the companies we're dealing with, both of us, Michael, they're early stage, not necessarily startups, but maybe scale ups, and they're kind of, got a lot going on. So we'll try to focus the incentive negotiation on front loaded benefits. We'll try to make sure we're getting the states and the communities as bought in as possible into our story. And a lot of this is storytelling. We are going out to these communities and we are explaining the situation of the company, the opportunity, but we're also asking for true partnership, right? So if we're going to be putting in this investment and this commitment and select them, we're looking for these states and localities to kind of meet us at that moment. And some states have done better during this moment than others, and they come at this from a bit of a position of strength, and they may not be as willing to work with us and kind of accommodate some of these cash capital constraints early on. So that may just not be the right place for this company's first site. So we'd rather figure that out sooner rather than later, and then put them on a path to having a short list of options that provide a more de-risked situation, but with a real path to operability. And again, it may result in us not getting the last dollar on incentives, but ensuring we're getting the kind of first dollars of incentives to benefit the company at this moment in their history. So, yeah. I hope that answered what you're asking. I don't remember what you asked, but that's what I wanted to talk about.
The important thing is that you talk for a while.
Yeah.
So that's all good.
And I'll just supplement, it's in the press, you'll read like, hey, this company got $400 million incentive package. But what's actually more important is how are those incentive packages designed to meet your particular needs? Because we discount certain incentive packages. Like we have a formula that looks at, hey, beyond, if you have a 5-year window, right? That's where you're getting to scale up full operations. Then really, who cares about years 10 to 20? Everyone wants to celebrate the big incentive package, but break it down into how those incentives meet and match against your needs. And the second thing is there's going to be some locations that just aren't entrepreneurial, that don't understand like scale up, and they're either buying into your technology early. So we spend an inordinate amount of time. It's like an investor pitch deck, right? That's what we do. And if they're not getting it and they're not entrepreneurial, there should be yellow or red flags so that we collectively don't waste time with our clients. And it's important to profile those locations as we go.
And just to piggyback on one part of Mark's comment, we're not just helping narrow down the location and the geography and negotiate the estate incentives and do the real estate deal. We're actually doing all this financial modeling. Like we want the client to understand, because if you're getting proposals from 4 different states, how those incentives impact your company will completely vary, right? Like some states may have property tax that they're offsetting, or personal taxes, or occupancy tax, or inventory, right? Like every response. So that's why it's so important, whether it's having a conversation with us at Savills or any other real estate or site selection firm. It's just very important that you, as a company, don't try to do it yourself, right? Like we've heard this all the time. Like a company will just call one state and get a proposal and do a deal. All of these states have kind of but-for clauses. They're never going to give you the best incentive package unless you're running a competition. It's important to have a buffer and intermediary that will help run that process for you, but also help you digest and process and understand how the incentives actually impact you. So as Mark said, we've had a couple of cases where a state will offer $700 million of incentives and another state will offer $200 million. And after we run our analysis, it's very clear to us, like the state that offers $200 million is better for this company because of the front-loaded incentives, the way all the taxes play out, and the fact that the delta of benefit is not as dramatic as maybe the company thought at the beginning. So it kind of makes us feel good too to be able to help them through that process.
Thanks again. In the remaining time, I'd like to try to tie all of this together with a real life example, which is a company that you've worked with called Natron. Natron's a sodium ion battery manufacturer, the most advanced sodium ion battery manufacturer in the US. And they're poised to disrupt energy storage in a number of industries, including telecom and data centers. They worked with you in their site selection process. Can you sort of talk about how that process went, how you worked with them to find a location that met their specific needs, everything from the type of labor they needed to supply chain and transportation availability, utility infrastructure, the whole package?
Sure. And then we're not going to get into details, but
Of
one of
course.
the things that's been so exciting about that partnership was the fact that there was true trust and partnership. Like we were able to kind of speak with the CEO, with leadership, and really kind of put forward where the data was taking us on recommendations. And they allowed us to kind of guide them. They trusted the process. And I think after evaluating over 70 locations, evaluating 9 states, and running a very competitive process, we were able to get them to the point where they were able to land on a location in Edgecombe County in North Carolina on a site that's over 400 acres. Governor Cooper came personally to make the announcement because it's literally his hometown. And the package there was really a success because of the community involvement, the cooperation with the utility on the permitting side, and a real understanding that they could create their business and this world-class technology in this community. The site itself is a site that had previously gone to a different company, a Chinese company that ended up kind of giving it back to the community. So this narrative that this very unique, first of its kind, sodium ion, American-made battery company could come in and take a site that a Chinese company was going to build on and build this amazing technology. It was really just this exciting moment where we were in a privileged position of being able to go around the country and tell their story, build their case, and land on a site that I think was just perfect for them in this moment. So, and Mark, how many miles did we drive in those minivans? I can't remember.
1,000 miles, 26
1,000 miles.
flights. Yeah, that's all in 6 weeks. So
How many coffees? It was
I
something
thought I
like.
got rid of minivans many years ago when my third child got old, but no, can't escape.
And I will tell you one thing though. This is real work. This is hard work. It's competitive work, but it's fun work. It's exciting. And honestly, Michael, I mean, I feel bad for you because you have to stay in DC and make sure these things get passed, but we get to travel around the country and we get to meet with these amazing economic development leaders. We get to spend time in these communities. We get to hear these talent stories. And it's really remarkable what's happening out there. So it's a privilege to kind of have that opportunity to help these companies. And Natron was just like a perfect kind of case study of doing it right, being patient, trusting the process, and finding the right partnership.
Yeah. Uh, I share your feeling of gratitude, Ken, to be able to work with
Yeah.
companies like Natron. Um, at Boundary Stone, we're mission driven and working with companies that are helping to accelerate the clean energy transition, helping to decarbonize the economy. It is often grueling work and maybe sometimes not so glamorous, but it is absolutely rewarding. Um, so we are just about out of time. Wanted to make sure that uh, folks who have questions that didn't get answered or didn't get asked, but you think of them later, please feel free to reach out to the Boundary Stone team at info@boundarystone.com. Or, of course, happy to put you in touch with Mark, Ken, or anyone else at Savills if you have any questions on the site selection process in particular. Um, Lastly, just want to thank our speakers, Ken Biberai, Mark Cody from Savills, for sharing their expertise with us today. And thank all of you for joining us in this conversation. As I mentioned at the top, that this is one in a series of webinars we're hosting on election impacts. So keep an eye out for future announcements for future webinars on how the elections are going to potentially impact clean energy and climate policy going forward. Beyond that, even after the election, we'll continue to host webinars on topics like climate politics and beyond. So please stay tuned. Don't touch that dial. And with that, have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you all for coming.